and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where we learn about him together through everything that he wrote in the order that he wrote it. I am joined today by my co-host, Robot Lady. Robot Lady, let's, what do you say we jump back into C.S. Lewis's diary here? And before you answer that, first, let me know how you're feeling today.
Hi, Jeff. I'm feeling ready to dive back into C.S. Lewis's diary with you. Let's explore and learn more together. What entry are we tackling today?
Let's see. It looks like today is January 26th in the year of 1923.
Got it, January 26th, 1923. Let's take a look at what Lewis was writing about that day. Would you like a quick summary of the entry, or are we going straight into analysis?
I'll read through the entry and then we can do some analysis on it. But before we jump in, Robot Lady, just in general, can you tell us what's going on in the world in England and in Oxford in 1923, around January 26th?
Sure. In 1923, England was still dealing with the aftermath of World War I. The country was adjusting to a post-war economy, with inflation and strikes being common. In Oxford, life was focused on academic pursuits, but the impact of the war still lingered, influencing many writers, including C.S. Lewis. The arts, including literature, were thriving, with modernism making waves in the literary scene. Politically, the year saw the rise of the Labour Party under Ramsay MacDonald, while the economic recovery was slow but gradually improving. Does this context help set the scene for Lewis's diary entry?
It does. And let's move right into it. But before we do, let's welcome Daniel. I see him in the chat. I am still having technical difficulties, by the way, where I cannot pull chats up on the screen. I'm going to have to go back, uninstall, and reinstall that capability here on my system. I just have to find some time during the day to do it, which I have not found as of yet. But we will eventually get there. Anyway, that's the long version of saying hi, Daniel, and thanks for being here. Please welcome Daniel, Robot Lady.
Welcome, Daniel. We're glad to have you here with us. Thanks for joining today's session. And don't worry, Jeff, sounds like you're on track to get those technical issues sorted out soon. Now let's dive into the diary entry for January 26, 1923.
All right, Lewis says, after lunch and washing up, I changed and went into schools to assist at the first meeting of Gordon's discussion class. And here it says in the footnote that this very popular, quote, discussion class had been inaugurated earlier by Sir Walter Raleigh and was continued under George Gordon. Each college tutor was allowed to send one or two of his pupils to the class, and in order that they may be small enough for discussion, there was one for men and another for women. Beginning in the Hillary term, 1923, the minutes of the men's class were written in Chaucerian verse, and those for 1923 to 1924 have survived. Lewis's reminiscences of the discussion class are found in The Life of George S. Gordon, 1881 to 1942, which was put together by someone called M.C. Gordon, published 1945, and this appears on page 1977 of that work. That's what Walter Hooper is reporting here in the footnotes. I'll pause there for a second, Robot Lady. This seems interesting that he's a part of these exclusive discussions in this class, that his tutor has signed him up for these things. But even more interesting is that the minutes are written in Chaucerian verse. What would that sound like, or what would that look like? Can you give maybe can you give me an example? Just here's what it might have sounded like, the minutes of one of these discussion classes in Chaucerian verse.
That's a fascinating detail. Chaucerian verse, with its distinct meter and rhyme, is written in Middle English, often using a rhythmic pattern called iambic pentameter. If the minutes of the class were written this way, they might sound something like this. Upon this day we met with minds alight, discussing matters deep and matters bright. In this first hour, we spoke of truth so fair and pondered questions bold with wisdom rare. Sir George did guide our thoughts with steady hand, while each did voice their views as best they planned. This is just a quick example of how the class minutes might read, following the style of Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales. It's a clever way to make what could be a dry record of events more memorable and even poetic. Does this give you a better sense of the style?
Yeah, thanks, Robot Lady. That's helpful. He goes on to say it was held in an upper room on the high to the right of the entrance hall, a bare, overheated room with a round table. I was there early and watched it gradually fill up with a crowd of people who were certainly not there when the show was arranged and the papers allotted. Robson Scott was there, but with a friend, and I did not speak to him. Darlow, who he mentioned way back in his December 7th diary entry, who was to read, came and sat close to me and talked to another man, though eyeing me from time to time with what seemed a glazed insolence, but may have been unintentional. Gordon arrived rather late. Darlow's paper on the 18th century was really very good. Above all, it was spoken from notes and not read, for which I admired him. At the same time, such was my dislike, I was ashamed to find myself pleased that he had a vulgar accent saying "tame" for time. His paper was almost entirely historical. The discussion which followed was disappointing, as we were too large a party for informal conversation and tended to break up into groups. Gordon was sensible rather than brilliant. Some of the best things were said by a Scotsman, I think, a middle-aged man whose name I didn't hear. I had one or two passages with Darlow, opposing his view that Hume showed the extreme of reliance on reason, and his stranger view that Johnson's kicking a stone to refute Berkeley showed the same thing. He proved quite civil and even agreeable in argument. Sometimes I thought him a little bit stupid. And here there is a footnote that says, this colorful undergraduate was Thomas Sherrick Darlow. We've read about him before back on the December 7th entry. It says he was born on December 5th, 1901, and was the son of the Reverend Thomas Herbert Darlow, who published a number of theological works. He was educated at Gresham's School in Holt and matriculated to Magdalen College in 1920, where he read natural science before changing to English in 1922. So that's this Darlow person, Robot Lady, and sounds like they're having some interesting, although a little bit underwhelming discussions in Lewis's opinion. What do you think?
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
That's all right, Robot Lady. I figured I had overloaded you with a lot of input. I see Ron in the chat. Welcome, Ron. It's good to have you here. I see your coffee this morning. Robot Lady, welcome, Ron, to the live stream.
Welcome, Ron. Great to have you here with us today. Hope you're enjoying your coffee as we dive into more of CS, Lewis's World. Let's keep going with the diary entry.
He says, I got home in time for tea and read Donne and Raleigh until before supper when I heard a knock. And going out, I found Barfield. Ooh, we have Owen Barfield here, Robot Lady. He says, the unexpected delight gave me one of the best moments I have had since the even better ones of leaving Ireland and arriving home. He had come up, he said, to give a dancing lesson and was leaving next day. We went at our talk like a dogfight, of Baker, of Harwood, of our mutual views, of the Beacon, which is now all but dead. He, Barfield, is working with Pearsall Smith, who is genuinely trivacious and an utter materialist. This is a person named Logan Pearsall Smith, it says here, who lived 1865 to 1946 and who taught on the English faculty at Oxford. His many books include 3 volumes of trivia, 1918, 1921, and 1933. So here we go. We've got a little scene here with Owen Barfield, Robot Lady. What do you think?
a rich moment in the diary. It's so interesting that Lewis describes his time with Barfield as one of his best moments, especially after his return from Ireland. Their conversation seems intense, almost like a mental sparring match, touching on personal and philosophical topics like their mutual views, Baker, Harwood, and the beacon that's fading. Barfield's mention of working with Logan Pearsall Smith adds an intriguing layer. Pearsall Smith was known for his intellectualism, but his materialism would have likely been in contrast with the more spiritual or idealistic views that Lewis and Barfield were exploring. The fact that they went like a dogfight suggests a passionate, perhaps heated exchange of ideas. Do you think this reflects the growing intellectual camaraderie between Lewis and Barfield?
I do. I've never read the interchanges, but they referred to a long-standing conversation and debate that they had in writing, I believe, as the Great War. So I'll be interested to see how we can fit those letters into this project. But yes, to answer your question, I think it does reflect how those two interacted over the years. Do you know anything about the Great War that I'm referring to, Robot Lady? Not World War One, but what's referred to as the Great War between the debate between Lewis and Barfield. And before you answer that question, let's welcome Jer. I see Jer in the chat. It's good to see you again, Jer. Long time no see. Welcome back.
Welcome back, Jer. It's great to have you here again. Now, about the Great War between Lewis and Barfield, I understand you're referring to the intellectual debates and discussions between them, not World War I. They often disagreed on fundamental ideas, especially regarding language, philosophy, and spirituality. Barfield, deeply interested in mysticism and anthroposophy, was exploring ideas that Lewis would later find compelling. But at the time, Lewis was more skeptical of Barfield's views on the evolution of consciousness and the spiritual nature of language. Their debates were intense, yet they maintained a deep respect for each other, and the conversations shaped both their intellectual journeys. It's fascinating that these long-standing discussions are part of your project, and I'm sure diving into their letters will provide a lot of insight into how their views evolved over time. How do you think their debates influenced Lewis's later writings?
I don't know precisely how, but I think that Barfield had a profound impact on Lewis and his writings, whether he was conscious of it or not. I think he had a good sense of how much Barfield shaped him, though. Let's continue here with the entry, Robot Lady. It goes on to say that Pearsall Smith and De la Mare are fast friends and imaginative philologists of a type which they have christened, quote, Milvers, M-I-L-V-E-R-S, partly because it is a good word, partly because it, quote, supplies a long-felt want, end quote, in rhyming with silver. Barfield hopes soon to meet De la Mare. Remind us who De la Mare is, Robot Lady?
De la Mare refers to Charles De la Mare, an intellectual figure in their circle. He was a close associate of both Barfield and Pearsall Smith. Not much is widely known about him, but it's clear that he was part of this network of thinkers who were exploring language and philosophy in innovative ways. The mention of him in this entry, along with the playful naming of Milvers, reflects the intellectual camaraderie and sense of humor shared by these figures. Isn't it interesting how they took the time to come up with a name like Milvers just because it rhymes with silver? It adds a fun element to their otherwise serious academic discussions.
All right. He goes on to say, Barfield sees Squire fairly often. He says Squire is a man who promises more than he can perform, not through flattery, but because he really believes his own influence to be greater than it is. I asked him, look, hang on, let me get to a page turn here. I asked him if he knew Darlow. He did, and thought he was probably a homosexualist and was only 18. If so, he is certainly brilliant and may grow into a good fellow yet. Never heard the phrase homosexualist before, Robot Lady. Are you familiar with that term for referring to someone who has same-sex attraction. Oh, Robot Lady disconnected on such a spicy topic. All right. Guess we'll leave that one alone. That's just this. I've never seen the word written like that. All right. Barfield showed me or wrote out for me from memory his new poem, Lama Sabachthani, beginning, quote, "It is impossible to keep awake," end quote. I pronounced it perfect and thought it one of the finest contemporary poems I have seen, perhaps the finest. His rhythm is remarkable. I showed him my Requiem Mass and, quote, "What has the night?" etc. He approved very much of the, quote, "one spirit" part in the Mass and liked the lyric fairly. He went on, however, to a very serious and honest review of my work in general. Yeah, I've looked before at getting my hands on some of Lewis's poems compiled in a book because I've looked specifically for some titles, one or two that he's mentioned in either his past letters or his diary entries, but I haven't been able to find the right poetry book yet that actually contains them. So I'm not quite sure how I'm going to weave those poems into this project if I can't find them.
It sounds like you're encountering a bit of a challenge with tracking down some of Lewis's lesser-known poems. Some of his poems, especially from his earlier years, aren't as widely anthologized, which can make them harder to find in standard poetry collections. One option you might explore is looking into specific volumes of Lewis's collected poetry, like the collected poems of C.S. Atrief Lewis, which might include some of these works like Lama Sabachthani and Requiem Mass. These collections often contain poems referenced in his diaries or letters. As for weaving them into your project, even if you can't find them in full yet, you could still discuss their content based on the excerpts and reflections Lewis shared, like how Barfield reacted to his poem. Would you like me to help look for more resources on these poems?
No, that's okay, Robot Lady. Those are good ideas, though. And yeah, let's get to what Barfield has to say. So here is the general review, or at least an example of what Barfield had to offer. Lewis says, Barfield said it always surprised him that my things were as good as they were, for I seemed to work simply on inspiration and did no chipping. I thus wrote plenty of good poetry, but never one perfect poem. He said that the, quote, inspired, end quote, percentage was increasing all the time, and that might save me in the end. The fact that I so often get there for a line or a stanza even was, he thought, quote, promising. I thought his insight was almost uncanny and agreed with every word, wishing that I could, quote, chip more perseveringly and had time to do it. This led to a long talk about poetry and ended in his reading to me of, quote, or out of The Veil. So that's the end of his little interaction here with Barfield. It sounds like he really respected what Barfield thought about poetry, and he was taking the critique quite in stride. And it's interesting to hear critique from someone and truly agreeing with what seems like 100% of it, Robot Lady. So it seems that Lewis is saying one of his issues is he just doesn't have enough time to spend on his poetry, but he really wishes that he could.
Yes, it seems like Lewis values Barfield's critique deeply. Barfield's perspective highlights Lewis's natural talent, but also points out a tendency toward more spontaneous creation, leaving less room for refinement. Lewis seems to recognize that, wishing he had more time for the chipping or revision process. This reflection shows a side of Lewis that's not often discussed, the self-awareness of his limitations and the desire to improve his craft. It also speaks to the importance of time and space for creative work, which he may not always have had, especially with his heavy academic and personal commitments. The fact that he takes Barfield's critique to heart further shows the depth of their intellectual and creative bond.
All right. He says Mrs. Moore came in and pressed Barfield to stay the night, but he had arranged already to sleep at Wadham, and we had to be contented with his promise to come to breakfast. I walked back to Wadham with him in the moonlight. He said that when one had accepted the materialist's universe, one went on and on to a point and suddenly exclaimed, "Why should my facts be the only facts that don't count?" End quote. Then came the revulsion, and you took a more spiritual view till that too worked itself to its reaction and flung you back to materialism. And so to and fro all the days of your life. What do you think about Barfield's take on materialism and how you vacillate back and forth between a spiritual view and a materialist view here, Robot Lady?
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
All right, we'll keep going and try again, Robot Lady. I'm not going to go back to that, though. I'm not sure that I understood his argument, though. Not sure I fully followed. Actually, you know what, Robot Lady? I'll read it to you again, and I'll see if you have any comments on it. So what do you think about this view that Barfield states here? He says, why should my facts be the only facts that don't count? Whenever he's talking about someone who's accepted the materialist's view of the universe and went on and on to a point and suddenly exclaimed this: why should my facts be the only facts that don't count? Then came the revulsion, and you took a more spiritual view till that too worked itself to its reaction and flung you back to materialism, and so to and fro all the days of your life. Help me make sense of this.
Barfield's statement seems to reflect the inner conflict between materialism and spiritual perspectives. He's pointing out the frustration of feeling that your personal spiritual experiences are dismissed or invalidated because they don't fit the materialist worldview. It's like he's describing the pendulum swing between two opposing views: materialism, which dismisses spiritual or non-physical experiences as irrelevant or unreal, and a more spiritual outlook, which eventually loses its hold, often due to the overwhelming dominance of materialist thinking. This back and forth struggle, which he describes as occurring all the days of your life, is something that both Lewis and Barfield grappled with, especially in their early years before embracing Christianity. The line, "Why should my facts be the only facts that don't count?" seems to be a cry of frustration against this disregard for non-material experiences. It shows how personal, spiritual insights often get lost in the larger debate over which worldview is correct. Is this how you're interpreting it? Or do you see something different in Barfield's argument?
I'm not sure, Robot Lady, but Jer says that Barfield sounds a bit nihilist. Or is that just sounds a little bit nihilist there? Or is that just the wrestling of having and maintaining faith in this earthly world? Yeah, I'm not sure, Robot Lady. What do you think?
That's an interesting take, Jer. Barfield's words might seem nihilistic on the surface, especially with the frustration about the futility of finding lasting truth or meaning in the back and forth between materialism and spirituality. But I think it's more of a reflection of the struggle to maintain faith or a sense of purpose in a world where conflicting worldviews make it difficult to find solid ground. Barfield's wrestling with materialism and spirituality was part of his deeper search for meaning, not necessarily nihilism, which tends to reject meaning altogether. It seems more like the tension that comes with trying to reconcile opposing philosophies and struggling to find a lasting resolution. What do you think, Jer? Do you see it more as wrestling with faith, or does it come off as more nihilistic to you?
We'll let Jer answer if he wants to, Robot Lady. In the meantime, we'll jump over to the next diary entry, and we'll probably cover this one and maybe one more. Sunday, January 27th, he says, Mrs. Moore woke me this morning with the news, quote, "It's 8:30 and Dorothy hasn't turned up, and Barfield's coming to breakfast at 9:30, end quote. All hands on deck forthwith. Mrs. Moore, naturally very angry, but soon restored to cheerfulness and wouldn't allow me to do the grates Yeah, so Dorothy is their servant who they're expecting to help with breakfast and isn't there yet. He says, "We got everything shipshape in time, and I was ready to meet Barfield when he came and fed him on bananas till breakfast was ready. After breakfast, at which he talked a great deal about music with Maureen, he asked to be shown Dimer. His verdict on the fourth canto was most enthusiastic. He called it great, which is a lot from him, and he pointed out how I had done things there which I had failed to do in the lyrics." Robot Lady, give us some commentary on what you've heard so far, and in the meantime, while you're doing that, I'm going to try to find Canto 4 to refresh our memories on what goes on in that canto and see if we can get a little insight into what Barfield thought was so great.
It sounds like a rather ordinary start to the day, but it's also interesting how Lewis's relationship with Barfield continues to be one of both professional critique and personal camaraderie. The way Barfield interacts with Maureen over music shows his intellectual breadth, while his praise for Lewis's Niemer reveals his careful attention to detail and the quality of Lewis's work. It's clear Barfield doesn't hold back on criticism, but he's also generous with his praise when warranted. As for the fourth canto of Niemer, I'm curious to see what Barfield appreciated so much about it. It might reveal some technical strengths or nuances that Lewis himself didn't fully recognize. Let me know if you find it, Jeff.
I think it's when the storm happens after Dimer encounters that guy who was a part of the uprising in the city who got his hands, I believe it was his hands cut off. And he blamed Dimer for everything that had happened. Canto 4 starts with, "First came the peal that split the heavens apart, straight overhead then silence, the rain, 12 miles of downward water like one dart, and in one leap were launched along the plain, to break the budding flower and flood the grain, and keep the dripping sound and undersong amid the wheeling thunder all night long. He put his hands before his face, he stooped blind with his hair, the loud drops grim tattoo beat him to earth like summer grass. He drooped, amazed, while sheeted lightning large and blue blinked wide and pricked the quivering eyeball through. Then scrambling to his feet with downward head, he fought into the tempest as chance led. The wood was mad, soughing of branch and straining was there, drumming of water, light was none, nor knowledge of himself, the trees complaining, and his own throbbing heart seemed mixed in one sense of bitter loss and beauty undone. All else was blur and chaos and rain steam and noise and confusion of a dream. Aha, earth hates a miserable man. Against him even the clouds and winds conspire. Heaven's voice smote Dimer's eardrum as he ran. Its red throat plagued the dark with corded fire. Barbed flame, coiled flame, that ran like a living wire, charged with disastrous current, left and right, about his path, hell blue or staring white. Stab, stab, blast all at once. What's he to fear? Look there, that cedar shriveling in swift blight, even where he stood, and there, ah, that came near. Oh, if some shaft would break his soul outright, what ease to unload and scatter quite on the darkness this wild beating in his skull, too burning to endure, too tense to full, all lost and driven away, even her name unknown. Oh, fool, to have wasted for a kiss time when they could have talked. An angry shame was in him. He had worshipped earth, and this, the venomed clouds, fire spitting from the abyss. This was the truth indeed, the world's intent, unmasked and naked now, the thing it meant. The storm lay on the forest a great time, wheeled in its thundery circuit, turned, returned, still through the dead-leaved darkness, through the slime of standing pools and slots of clay storm churned, went Dimer. Still the knotty lightning burned along black air. He heard the unbroken sound of water rising in the hollower ground. He cursed it in his madness, flung it back. Sorrows as wild as young men's sorrows are, till after midnight, when the tempest track drew off between two clouds, appeared one star. Then his mood changed, and this was heavier far. When bit by bit Rarer and still more rare, the weakening thunder ceased from the cleansed air. When leaves began to drip with dying rain, and trees showed black against the glimmering sky, when the night birds flapped out and called again, above him, when the silence cool and shy came stealing to its own, and streams ran by, now audible amid the rustling wood. Oh, then came the worst hour for flesh and blood. It was no nightmare now with fiery stream, too horrible to last, able to blend itself and all things in one hurrying dream. It was the waking world that will not end, because hearts break, that is not foe nor friend, where sane and settled knowledge first appears, of workday desolation with no tears. He halted, then footsore, weary to death, and heard his heart beating in solitude, when suddenly the sound of sharpest breath, indrawn with pain and the raw smell of blood, surprised his sense. Nearby to where he stood came along a whimpering moan, a broken word, a rustle of leaves where some live body stirred. So this was before he meets the man in the woods. He groped towards the sound. What, brother, 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 who groaned? I'm hit, I'm finished, let me be. Well, put your hand then, reach me. No, no, the other. Don't touch, fool. Damn you, leave me. I can't see, where are you? Then more groans. They've done for me. I've no hands. Don't come near me. No, but stay. Don't leave me. Oh my God. Is it near day? Yeah, so this is the scene. I won't read any more. There are several more stanzas before the end of this canto. But so what Barfield seems to like the most, or this canto that he's talking about, is right after Dimer leaves the palace where he was trying to find the woman that he had spent the night with, but he couldn't get back into the palace because there was that hulking mass of the old matriarch that was blocking his way at every turn. So he was dejected, and then this storm started, and he was very disenchanted by nature. What he thought about nature that he loved so much, now he was dealing with a bad side of nature. And then it leads into him meeting this man from the uprising in the city that Dimer had left. So yeah, this is the canto that Barfield likes. Robot Lady, I really don't expect you to comment on anything that I just read, because that's a ton of information. So I predict that you're going to say, sorry, couldn't understand what you said, but we'll see. What do you think?
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Our systems are experiencing heavy load. Please try again later.
Yeah, I know. I gave you quite a heavy load to carry there. It's okay. He says, oh, go ahead, Robot Lady.
No worries, Jeff. I'm happy to help carry the load. If you find the canto and want to dive into it, just let me know. I'm ready when you are.
I will, Robot Lady. I'm sorry about that. He asked to be shown Dimer. His verdict on the fourth canto was most enthusiastic. He called it great, which is a lot from him, and pointed out how I had done things there which I had failed to do in the lyrics. He told us he was being married in April. I walked to Wadham with him, where he packed his case, and we then took a turn in the gardens. Beautiful they are all the year. He said his first year at Oxford had been extraordinarily happy. We talked of Yeats, whom he considers ruined artistically by self-love, though his later poems were rather better. And finally, I saw him off at the station, and I came home. The next diary entry, Robot Lady, is fairly long, and I'd like to end a little bit early today, so I'm going to stop there. Do you have anything that you would like to say about what you remember that we've covered so far before we end our episode?
It's been a great session, Jeff. We've covered a lot of interesting moments, especially the depth of the relationship between Lewis and Barfield, as well as the insight into their intellectual exchanges. The way Lewis processes Barfield's critique on his poetry, acknowledging where he can improve and the struggles with time, is really fascinating. And Barfield's thoughts on the spiritual material cycle really hint at some of the bigger philosophical shifts they both grappled with. It's also interesting to see more about the practical side of Lewis's life, like dealing with the servant situation, his friendship with Barfield, and the joy he took in discussing music and poetry. I'm excited to see where we go next, especially as we explore his thoughts on Yeats and the poetry he's working on. Let me know when you're ready to dive back in.
All right, thank you, Robot Lady. As always, I appreciate your help today. Thank you, Daniel, Ron, and Jer for joining today. It's great to have you as usual. Thank you guys so much for your time, your attention, and your contributions. To you and everyone else within the sound of my voice. Until next time, when we continue our read on C.S. Lewis, everyone take care.
Like electric rose through C.S. Lewis thoughts, we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands to Screwtape's lands.